Our study today begins a study of Revelation 11, Part 1, which is titled Measuring the Temple of God. Last time, when we were concluding Revelation 16, I read this quote, and I'll read it again, and this explains why we are transitioning from 16 to 11. Manuscript 1518, Ellen White said in 1906, "The Lord calls for his people to locate away from the cities. For in such an hour as ye think not, fire and brimstone will be rained from heaven upon these cities. Proportionate to their sins will be their visitation. Let all who would understand the meaning of these things read the 11th chapter of Revelation. Read every verse and learn the things that are yet to take place in the cities." So, following our study that we did at the end of studying Revelation 16 about the cities of the nations fell, we looked at the general mayhem of the end of the 7 last plagues, the 7th plague, where the mountains disappear, the cities are burning, etc., etc. This is just moments before Jesus comes, when the deliverance of his people comes. And we also looked at other cities that are mentioned in the Spirit of Prophecy by name: San Francisco, Oakland, Nashville, New York, and Chicago. So in the context of that, we read this verse talking about getting out of the cities, because it says, "Fire and brimstone will be rained from heaven upon these cities. Proportionate to their sins will be their visitation. Let all who would understand the meaning of these things read the 11th chapter of Revelation. Read every verse and learn the things that are yet to take place in the cities." So that's why we're going to study Revelation 11. So let's start with verse 1, Revelation 11:1. She said, read every verse. And so we're going to do that and attempt to understand each verse and what God is trying to tell us in Revelation 11. So verse 1 says, "And there was given to me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein." So, a reed is a stiff piece of grass, and it was made like a ruler, a rod, and it was made to be a measuring stick. And so, God is saying, through the angel, to John, measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship in the temple of God. So we're going to look at various possibilities of what this might mean. We know that Jesus is instructing his friend and disciple John in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is a revelation of Jesus Christ to us through it being given to John, and then he wrote it down. So Jesus is instructing his friend and disciple John, for John to measure the temple of God and the people in it. Now the wording here sounds like the wording used in Zechariah 2. In the Old Testament, it reads, "I lift up mine eyes again," this is Zechariah talking, "and looked, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then said I, Whither goest thou? And he said unto me, To measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof, and what is the length thereof." So Zechariah is having this vision, and he's seeing a man with a big tape measure, you might say. And he says, "What's going on?" And he says, "I've come to measure the city, how long it is and how wide it is." This is this is Jerusalem, not New Jerusalem. What's interesting as a side note is in the book of Revelation, at the end of the book when it talks about the New Jerusalem, it actually says how big it is, the length and the width and the height. And it is bigger than the state of Washington. Plus it's that high. It's as high as it is wide and deep. So it's not insignificant, I believe, that later on in Revelation when it talks about the New Jerusalem, the measurements are actually given. In this case, Zechariah is in the Old Testament, and he's seeing this vision and about measuring Jerusalem, the city, and the reason was, the context of this is that Jerusalem, the temple had been, and Jerusalem had been damaged or destroyed. And one of the correlations that some people see in Revelation 11 might be that God is promising to the Israelites to deliver his people and to rebuild the temple in Zechariah's day. So that's one of the contexts. Now, if we take that and then we double application it to end times, because that is the context in the book of Revelation, what would be the correlation between Zechariah measuring Jerusalem to have it rebuilt and to restore his people? So one of the correlations for Daniel 11 might be that God is promising to deliver his end-time saints during Jacob's time of trouble, just before Jesus returns. So that's one possibility. Revelation 7:1-4 says, "After these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth." We quote this verse frequently in our conversations because we see more and more violence and disasters and things going on almost on a monthly basis, especially this year. And it's many times that me or my friends will say, well, it seems pretty obvious that the angels are letting go little by little of the 4 winds of strife. So this verse here is saying that the 4 angels standing symbolically on the 4 corners of the earth are holding back the 4 winds so that things won't blow up and Satan have complete control. So now let's take a look at this verse carefully. "After these things I saw 4 angels standing in the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice." Remember what the seal of the living God is. That's the seal that goes on the saints that don't take the mark of the beast during the little time of trouble. "I saw another angel ascending from the east," and the east is symbolic of coming from heaven, "having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it is given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, until we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads." So this is saying that the sealing, which happens when a person makes their final decision for God or not for God, they either take the mark of the beast or they are sealed with the seal of God, because then they will never change their mind. These angels that are holding back the winds of strife, when they let go, the earth is going to get hurt. The sea is going to get hurt. The trees are going to get hurt. The world's going to be in chaos. So that's being held back in part until the sealing of the servants of God is done. "And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and they were sealed 144,000. So here again, we know that we're talking about the little time of trouble, sequentially here, because this is when the decisions are being made for the mark of the beast or not, once everybody has made their choice and God's people are all sealed, then they make up this body called the 144,000. God has an end-time people who will be faithful even during trials and persecution during the time of trouble. These saints who will live through Jacob's time of trouble are the 144,000. So one possible understanding of the measuring of the temple of God and those who are in it is having to do with the end-time temple and people in it. Could be identifying the remnant at the close of probation. Some also believe that the measuring of the temple and the people in it, Revelation 11:1, is the restoration and preservation of God's temple, would be seen also to be a particular application to the fuller understanding of God's work in the heavenly sanctuary that has come since 1844. You will recall that the issue of 1844 was the cleansing of the sanctuary, the temple of God. And so one of the understandings of this meaning of measuring the temple and the people that are worshiping in it is the enhanced understanding by Christians about what's going on in the literal temple in heaven. One thing seems obvious with these different possible interpretations is that John is not being told to measure the literal temple in Jerusalem, because it doesn't even exist. As Jesus had predicted in Matthew 24, the temple was destroyed in AD 70. So by the time John is on the Isle of Patmos as a prisoner at the end of his life, it's my understanding he was about 90 years old, this could very well have been already in his lifetime. And so this prophecy looking into the future about measuring the temple is very likely not talking about the physical temple in Jerusalem because it's destroyed. And we studied this in part 6 of Preparing for the Time of Trouble.com in conjunction with the sign of leaving the cities and Jesus' prophecy of Matthew 24 and the sign when you're supposed to leave, and how the people that left, the Christians that left, none of them died when the city was destroyed and the temple was destroyed. So if that's something that you missed, you could go back to part 6. So while it is true that Zechariah was instructed to measure the temple for the purpose of rebuilding the temple in the Old Testament times, the Bible seems to make it plain that the temple was no longer going to be where God dwelled, as shown by the temple curtain being torn top to bottom at Jesus' crucifixion. So the temple that Zechariah was talking about measuring is not the same temple that Revelation 11 is talking about, we believe. There is likely going to be, even though there is no third temple, remember the first temple, and then it was destroyed, and then there was the second temple, and it was destroyed after Jesus, and then now there is no temple, and there's this big argument. You can see it in the picture here. This is Temple Mount and Jerusalem, and the reason there is no temple is because the Muslims have control of the area where it is believed by the Jews that they need to build the temple. So there are 3 world religions all claiming connection to this sacred ground, and therefore nobody can move to figure out what to do. So the Jews have already put together all of the needed things to build that third temple, including the animal sacrifice, including the training of the priesthood, including all the furnishings and that kind of thing. The only thing left is the physical temple. And so we talked about this at length in part 17 when we studied Daniel 11. And if you'd like to go back and check that out, this lady in the picture is a tour guide explaining all this firsthand. So we concluded from our past studies that it's likely that it is not talking about, let me back up. We concluded in our previous studies, particularly part 17, that there may be a third Jewish temple built. But even this tour guide lady explained that many people believe that if and when that gets built, it will be occupied by the Antichrist and not Christ. It won't really be the third temple where God would dwell. Remember, these previous temples and the sanctuary in the desert, God's presence was in the temple. And so even this non-Seventh-day Adventist tour guide is explaining to CBN how she believes, and many believe, that when this third temple gets built, it's going to be a false Messiah. The world is getting set up for that. So it will be used, I believe, by the Antichrist, and the very possibility connected to the devil impersonating the second coming of Christ. It's my personal hunch is that Satan will impersonate the second coming. We know that. And by then, I believe the temple will be built. And then the Pope will encourage people to believe this Messiah, which is the devil impersonating the second coming. And then he will go in and officiate religious services in this new temple. I won't be surprised if that's the way it turns out. Now, there may yet be another possible meaning for the message from Jesus to John in Revelation 11:1, and I think it is very applicable to us. To go there, we go back to Matthew 13:24-30, where Jesus is telling a parable. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while the man slept, his enemy came and sowed tares amongst the wheat, and went away. But when the blade was sprung up, and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the household came and said to him, Sir, did not thou sow seed that was good seed in the field? From whence have we got these tares? So you planted good seed. Why do we have tares? You didn't plant bad seed. He said unto them, An enemy has done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while we gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let them both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, bind them in bundles and burn them, then gather the wheat into my barn. Now the disciples were listening to this parable, but they didn't quite understand. So after the crowds had left, the disciples came and asked for an explanation. Matthew 13 continues, And his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. Now notice carefully the timing here. He's not only identifying the different entities in this parable, but he's setting the time of when it is. He's talking about the end of the world and how the angels are reaping the harvest. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. Remember, we studied in Revelation 16 about the cities being burned just before Jesus comes. So here's what we learn from that when we pull this apart, the interpretation. Jesus is the sower. The good seed is the children of the kingdom. The bad seed is the children of the wicked one. The bad seed sower is the devil. And the timing of the harvest is the end of the world. Christ Object Lessons, page 71, says, Christ's servants are grieved as they see true and faithful believers mingled in the church. Okay, this is not just talking about back in the disciples' days. We're talking about now. Picture you in your church, wherever that is, and you might see some people that you believe are not following God's instruction. Christ's servants are grieved as they see true and false believers mingled in the church. They long to do something to cleanse the church. Like the servants of the householder, they are ready to uproot the tares. But Christ says unto them, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up some wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. So what is this saying? This is saying if you go to church and you see people who you believe are following God carefully and others who are not, that we shouldn't be on a campaign to kick out these people who aren't measuring up and taking God seriously. That's what I believe it's saying. So, here's my interpretation, today's church. So here we see this parable symbolizing the church today and how there is a mix of serious, faithful members and others. In some cases, the devil even plants false believers as a distraction. The rest of the tares likely are well-intentioned baptized members, but have not developed a deep personal relationship with Jesus and therefore are not settled in the truth intellectually in their mind and spiritually in their heart. So they cannot be moved. Great Controversy, page 622. The time of trouble such as never was, that's Jacob's time of trouble, is soon to be upon us. And we shall need an experience which we do not now possess, and which many are too indolent to obtain. Indolent, I would say, means lazy. So now let's reread that. Jacob's time of trouble is soon to be upon us. We need to have an experience we don't have, and many of us are too lazy to bother to try to get that experience. Last Day Events 2:19-2:20. Just as soon as the people of God are sealed in their foreheads, it is not a seal or a mark that can be seen. What is it? A settling into the truth both intellectually and spiritually, so they cannot be moved. Just as soon as God's people are sealed and prepared for the shaking, it will come. Indeed, it has already begun. So what's the shaking? The shaking and the sealing has already begun, according to what we read. There are some people who have already been sealed. We don't know who they are. It could be you, and you wouldn't know it. But people who are sealed, because we know that the judgment starts in the house of God and then it goes to the world. So I believe there are people in our congregations who are already sealed. They will never be moved. They are settled into the truth spiritually and intellectually, and they are safe to save. But there's also going to be a shaking, a sifting of these who are faithful and those who are not. So the seal of God is not a physical mark. We're pulling pieces out of this previous quote. It's a settling into the truth intellectually in your mind. It's a settling into the truth spiritually. It's relational with Jesus. It's a real, actual relationship. Settling into the truth so you cannot be moved. You won't change your mind, no matter what. And at the same time, there is a shaking, there's turmoil in the church because of the bridge, the difference between those who are settled into the truth spiritually and intellectually and those who are not. The shaking is the separating of those sealed and not. So as time goes along, we're going to see more and more of the shaking. Ellen White says the shaking already started, but we can see fairly obviously that it's intensifying. The shaking is getting to be more noticeable in the church. Last day events 173. There will be a shaking of the sieve. The chaff must in time be separated from the wheat. Because iniquity abounds, the love of many waxes cold. It is the very time when the genuine must be the strongest. So don't get discouraged if you are a faithful believer and you're discouraged by what you see in the turmoil in the church. This is prophesied. This is part of the process. And just like Jesus told the disciples, don't go ripping everything apart, trying to kick out, people that don't measure up, because it will do damage to some of the more vulnerable faithful. Let God do the separating. The Lord is soon to come, and there must be a refining, winnowing process in every church. For there are among us wicked men who do not love the truth or honor God. We are in the shaking time, the time when everything that can be shaken will be shaken. The Lord will not excuse those who know the truth if they do not in word and deed obey his commands. That's a pretty serious statement. So if you are a regular attending baptized Seventh-day Adventist Christian and you know better, but you are not choosing to obey God's words and deeds in his commandments, then you're on shaky ground and need to do some serious soul searching. Last day events 175. I asked the meaning of the shaking I had seen, and was shown that it would be caused. What causes the shaking? It would be caused by the straight testimony called forth by the counsel of the true witness to the Laodiceans. This is part of the study in Revelation about the 7 churches in the early half of Revelation, and Laodicea is the last church in the history sequence of the Christian church, of which we are in. We end-time Christians, our church is Laodicea. And Jesus said, I wish that you were hot or cold. I'd rather spew you out of my mouth if you're lukewarm. Well, I think our church is lukewarm in general, and many of us need to up our game to not be lukewarm. So I asked the meaning of the shaking, and it was shown that it was caused by the straight testimony called forth by the counsel of the true witness of the Laodiceans. So what is the testimony, the straight testimony? The straight testimony is the truth. And when the truth is spoken from God's word and the spirit of prophecy, and others rebel and recoil from the truth and don't want to accept it, that makes a division between those who are faithful and those who are not within the church. And that makes this rift, and that makes this tension and this turmoil in the church between the wheat and the tares. This, it continues, will have its effect upon the heart of the receiver, and will lead him to exalt the standard and pour forth the straight truth. So if you are an honest of heart, searching Christian, Seventh-day Adventist, this straight testimony, the truth, will have an effect on your heart as the receiver, and it will lead you to exalt the standard, hold the standard high, and pour forth the straight truth. You'll be bold to tell the straight truth, even if it's not popular among some. Some will not bear this straight testimony. So there will be people in the church who, when they hear the straight testimony from God's word and the spirit of prophecy, they won't want to hear it. They will rise up against it, and this will cause the shaking among God's people. I don't care what denomination you're in. I don't care which Seventh-day Adventist local church you might be attending or a member. My question is, have you seen this in your local congregation? And I'm assuming this is happening all over the world. I have sure seen it in any of the Seventh-day Adventist churches that I've attended. And I've attended them in several states. This tension, this turmoil, this division between people who feel like they're being faithful and people who are not taking the testimony seriously, not keeping the commandments seriously. This is creating this tension, and it's creating the shaking that God predicted. 2 Thessalonians 2:2-4, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit or word or letter, as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, but that the day shall not come, except there come a falling away first. So, Paul is saying there's going to be a shaking, and don't let it rattle you, because this is going to happen. There is going to be division in the church. There's going to be people who will fall away and either not attend anymore or will stay in the church and not follow the beliefs they once agreed were part of their life. And this division is predicted by Paul that this has to happen before Jesus comes. There has to be a falling away before the day of Christ. Last day events, 178. The enemy has made masterly efforts to unsettle the faith of our own people in the testimonies, in the writings of Spirit of Prophecy. This is just as Satan designed it should be. And those who have been preparing the way for the people to pay no heed to the warnings and reproofs of the testimonies of the Spirit of God will see that a tide of errors of all kinds will spring into life. Now think about that. You probably know some people who maybe at one time believed in the testimonies of the Spirit of Prophecy as coming from God, and maybe now don't take it seriously. Notice what it says. Preparing the way for the people to pay no heed to the warnings and reproofs of the testimonies of the Spirit of God. And it will result in a tide of errors of all kinds that will spring into life. So this is the beginning of a sequence of downward spiral. The first thing is to discredit the Spirit of Prophecy. It continues. It is Satan's plan to weaken the faith of God's people in the testimonies. Next, step number 2, follows skepticism in regard to the vital points of our faith, the pillars of our position. Then, step 3, doubt in the Holy Scriptures. And then step 4, the downward march to perdition. In other words, they're lost. So here's a slippery slope of a sequence. If we succumb to questioning and doubting God's messages through the Spirit of Prophecy, the next thing we'll do is question and discredit some of our Seventh-day Adventist pillars of our faith. Maybe the Sabbath. Maybe the state of the dead. That then results in questioning the Holy Bible as a whole. Do you believe that God created the earth? Or do you believe in evolution? See how it happens? Slippery slope. And the end is a downward march to perdition. Revelation 22, verses 10 through 12 reads, "And he saith unto me, Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book," book of Revelation, "for the time is at hand. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. And he which is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still." This is the close of probation. We know that. We've studied this before. "And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me, to give every man according to his work shall be." So now in these end times, with prophecy fulfilling all around us at such a rapid and increasing rate, it is time for each of us to do some serious self-reflection. We need to allow God to measure his church, my church, your church, and those of us who worship in it. Are we settled into the truth intellectually? Do we understand? Do we have in our mind, have we memorized promises of God? Have we understood Bible prophecy and the promises of Jesus and the story of his life and what he did for us? Are we settled in to the truth in our minds? Are we settled into the truth spiritually? Do we have a heart relationship with the Savior of the world? Or is this just talk? We have to have both. Are we picking and choosing what to believe in the spirit of prophecy? If we're picking and choosing what we're going to believe, then why believe any of it? It's either right or it's not right. Are we then picking and choosing what to take seriously from the Bible? For instance, God makes it really clear about the Ten Commandments. He makes it really clear about fidelity. He makes it really clear about being a good person. He makes it really clear about keeping the Sabbath. He makes it really clear about believing that God created the world and not to believe evolution. Are we picking and choosing what to take seriously from the Bible? Most of all, are we fully committed to God? Or are we just playing church? So my commitment, and I hope that it's yours, is like Joshua 24:15. In the lobby of our home, we have a table, and on there is a big family Bible, and it's open to this verse, and it's highlighted. "Choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord."